everybody. Let's go ahead and get started for today. Hello to everyone and welcome to our weekly 30-minute webinar installment. My name is Dan Schmidt, Systems Engineer here at Variphy, and today I'll be your host for today's webinar session. Today we're going to be joined with Victor Verba, aka CDR Jesus, another Systems Engineer over here at Variphy. For today's webinar, we're going to show you how to use search sets in an advanced manner to get very specific call results. So advanced search set usage. Just a quick agenda for today's webinar. First, we're going to start off with a quick overview of our company and what we do. We'll jump right then into a live demo where Vic will show us the intricacies of search sets and how you'll benefit using those in a very granular and segregated data sets. We'll then pause for some Q&A and get some of your questions answered. During the demo, if you have any questions, make sure to ask them in the Q&A panel on the bottom right-hand screen of the WebEx. After Q&A, we'll reward one lucky winner a $50 Amazon gift card, so stick around to see if you have won. Just a quick overview of Variphy. Variphy is the preferred analytics and management solution for Cisco Collab. We provide industry-leading CDR reporting and call analytics, customizable dashboards and widgets, UCCX reporting, remote phone control, change management. But in today's session, we're really going to be focusing on the CDR reporting and call analytics and the search sets within them. If you have any other questions regarding any of the other features we offer, please do let us know. We can most definitely take those offline and get those answered for you. Before we do get started today, yet another announcement that we do now offer a new service that provides a managed consulting service to our customers. Variphy's SE team will be engaged on a one-on-one basis to remotely provide additional consulting, unassisted reporting, dashboarding, configuration, and system monitoring assistance. This is going to be a service that provides a dedicated Variphy SE to do all the heavy lifting of the report creation and generation for you. If you have any interest or for more information, please contact us or your account manager, and we'll be glad to speak more in depth with you regarding that. All right, so let's go ahead and get into it. Vic will get us started and show us advanced search sets. So Vic, let me pass you the ball.
All right, excellent. Thank you, Dan. Go ahead and get shared out here.
There you go, Vic.
All right, there we are. All right, thank you everybody for joining us today. So like Dan said, one of the things we're going to take a look at today is kind of using the search sets in a more advanced manner. A lot of times folks will come in and I need a departmental report, or I need a quick search for an extension or something like that. So, which is great, and Variphy does an excellent job of being able to produce that information. But what we're going to look at today is a little bit more of some of the options that you have, being able to use multiple search criteria, also kind of leveraging some of this match all search criteria. So let's go ahead and jump into it. You know, one of the things that we see a lot, whether by accident or not by accident, is a lot of people have a tendency to not quite understand how this match all search criteria is used or exactly what it's for. So we're going to talk a little bit about that first. So match all search criteria allows us to differentiate your search information between the difference of an and or an or statement. So essentially what I have right now is I'm just looking at a blank slate and I'm looking at match all search criteria, and this is turned off. So anything that I search in here is not going to be compounded. In other words, I'm not going to be filtering on adding multiple criteria. I'm just going to add more to my report. So let's take a look at a quick example. So one of the things we see a lot of and a lot of questions we have is, I want to see, all my inbound and outbound calls. What's my total number of inbound and outbound calls? And, I want to know how many of those are inbound or how many of those are outbound. There's a couple different ways to accomplish that within Variphy. So let's go ahead and start with that. So I want to see all my inbound and outbound calls. I'm going to start with my originating and terminating device name. And in this case, I'm going to use my SIP gateway because for me, that's going to very clearly identify all my inbound and outbound calls. So if I run this guy right now as is, I'm going to go ahead and choose the previous week for data. It's going to come back with a whole series of calls. 7,000 calls, all inbound, outbound, trunk-to-trunk gateway, we don't know, but it is excluding my internal calls because I am running it on a SIP gateway. Now, the next thing I want to be able to do is I want to see, okay, this is great. This is good information. I got 7,000 calls, inbound, outbound. I want to be able to differentiate those a little bit from inbound and outbound. And there's a couple different ways to do that in Variphy. One is I could create a separate search set for each one. And I could create a search that says, okay, show me all of my inbound calls. And then I could create another search that says, show me all of my outbound calls. And another search that says, show me all calls. So that's one way of being able to do that. And we're going to talk a little bit about multi-search set in a second. But there's also an alternative. So right now I'm looking at all my inbound and outbound calls, but no differentiation. Now, the next thing I could do here is I can actually come in and say, I want to see all my originating calls. In other words, all my inbound calls based on this SIP trunk. So because I don't have this box checked right here, it's actually going to provide me summary information for all of my calls. Then it's also going to go ahead and provide me summary information for all my inbound calls, anything that originated on my SIP gateway. So let's take a quick look at that. So I'm going to go ahead and view results here. We're going to export these results, because that's going to give us a little bit of that definition. And then we get to define what do we want to see. I'm just going to keep it simple, total call count, average call duration. Maybe we want to see some abandoned numbers or something like that. So we're going to keep it relatively simple. We're going to run this in an HTML format, and I'm going to show you the differences of using this search match all criteria and not using the match all criteria. So essentially what it's doing right now is it's basically just bringing back my search. And it's going to provide me two different summary values. The first summary value it's going to go ahead and provide is going to be all my calls. And let's take a look at it. So I can see I have 7,000 and 1,100 total calls in and outbound. But what I've done here by not checking that match all criteria is it's also giving me summary for just the calls that came into my gateway. So it's a great little option there that I don't need to have all of the criteria broken down into separate search sets. Now, that's great. I've got all of my inbound calls. I have my total calls, but let's go ahead and add to that a little bit here. Let me close this guy out. If it's letting me here, my PC's acting a little funky here. Looks like maybe it's trying to render that report here. I did bring back a lot of calls. As we can see, it's locking up. So just bear with me 1 second here. Technical difficulties. And we may just close this guy out here. There we go. So let me close this out. There we go. All right. So the next thing we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to add, I want to see all of my outbound calls. So very easily I could come in, type in device name, and now I'm going to have my terminating device. So if I pop in my SIP gateway on that one also, I'm going to get a clear definition of all my calls going in and out of my SIP trunk, all of my inbound calls, and then also all of my outbound calls. So if we could quickly view those results, and then we're going to export this. And I'm going to turn off detail in this particular case because I don't need to see all of the detail. It'll make the report run a little bit faster, and it'll render on my screen a little bit. So now what we have is a clear definition of total number of calls in and out, total number of inbound calls, and also total number of outbound calls. Now, I get these separated like this because I chose not to match all criteria. Now, if I match all the criteria, it's difference between saying, give me this information and give me this information and give me this information, or like an or statement. I want this or this or this. Okay. Now, when I check mark this box, you're going to see a much different result. So what check marking this box is going to do is it's going to say any call that I bring back has to match all of these definitions. So if I view these results, you're going to see we went from 1,700 calls down, or 7,000 calls down to 33 calls. And if I export this, you're going to see those same results here. So the big difference here is rather than taking all of those statements as completely different statements and providing a summary value on each individual one, it's actually merging them all and saying all of the calls that I bring back have to meet this particular criteria. Okay. Another great use case for this is departmental searches. I see it used a lot. So let's say I'm trying to find all of the calls in or out of a particular department. And I'm going to go ahead and use my, my maintenance department here. So I'm going to go ahead and choose originating, dialed, or terminating department. And I'm going to pick on my maintenance group. All right, so if I search this, no problem. It's going to bring me back all the calls to or from my particular maintenance group, and I've got 1,287 calls. But maybe I have a couple folks that are not part of my maintenance department, but they take calls. I need to be able to see their criteria on this report also. Now, again, we're going to talk about creating different search sets, and I could create a different search set that's going to be just those two people, but I don't necessarily have to. What I can do is actually just add their search information directly into this report. And now I'm going to basically see, we'll pick on this guy, and we'll pick on this guy over here. Now, because I do not have this checked, what it's going to do, it's going to bring me back information for both of these users, but also bring me back information for my maintenance department, and then it's going to also summarize that information. So let's take a quick peek at that. Now what you're seeing is exactly what I asked it for. I said, don't match all my criteria. I want to see the information for this guy, as well as this guy, and then I want a total summary. So this is a great option when I have a department, or maybe I have multiple departments in my organization, or I'm a manager of, and I want to see both of them separated, but I really want them all in one report. So by not matching all, it's giving you that multiple layers of information on a single report. Now, this is great, and we have this in here, and if I turn that option off, you're going to see our results are going to go down pretty dramatically, because what it's saying is I only want to see those two particular extensions and this maintenance department, or the calls for this maintenance department that match those two extensions. So you'll notice that brings that value down. Now, another quick tip that I wanted to kind of show is this is great. It's nice to be able to see the breakdown of the extensions and the department, but maybe you don't want that. Maybe you just want one summary. So within Variphy, when I export this report, I can actually go ahead and change some of the values. So when I hit export, I go to search set summary. I have this guy over here that says show search set criteria. Well, this is my search set criteria, and so is this, and so is this. Now, if I toggle this guy off, now I'm going to go ahead and get one nice summary for my maintenance department. And you're going to see very similar, the same metrics, the same total summary values, but what you're going to get is they're just going to be laid out in a different way. So, whoops, hold on one second. Let me go ahead and export that again here. Let me turn this guy off. There we go. Maintenance department. Run this guy. And now what we have, rather than breaking it down, which is what we saw here, we just have one maintenance department. It's taking on the search set name that I gave it. It's giving me the total calls, and this is combined for both of those users. But it's a nice little tidbit of way of information. A lot of times a manager will see this and be like, I don't know what any of this means. I don't necessarily need to see that. I just need a total for my department plus these two people. So by just check marking and turning that guy off, it's a nice way to be able to just kind of consolidate that report a little bit and make it look a little bit prettier. All right, so that's kind of tidbit number one. Now, the next thing we're going to go ahead and take a look at is we're going to take a look at how we can use multiple search sets. So let me clear out this information here. We're going to build a report that's based on, and we're going to focus on a couple specific criteria. But keep in mind, as I'm building this report out, the criteria that we're using here is very specific to this example, but it could be anything. It could be multiple departments. It could be hunt groups. It could be queue times. So what we're going to do, I'm going to focus in on all calls in my organization that are abandoned. But then what I'm going to do is I'm going to break down those abandoned calls based on the ring times. And to do that, we're going to go ahead and use multiple search sets. So to bring back all of the calls, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just filter on something very general. I'm just going to say any original called party number that starts with the number X. Okay, X being a wild card in Variphy, I'm just basically going to bring back a general summary, high-level summary of all 10,000 calls. I don't need this. I'm really looking for abandoned calls. So I'm going to whittle this report down a little bit to bring back just my abandoned calls. But then what we're going to do is we're going to add additional search sets into this to start filtering out those abandoned calls to how long they rang. Anybody that rang less than 5 seconds, anybody that rang between 5 and 15 seconds. And we're going to build those search sets out so you get a good depiction of how those search sets can be used at multiple layers. And then what I'm going to do towards the end here is I'm going to show you a report that we had worked with our enhanced consultative service on that goes pretty in depth as far as hunt groups. So let's go ahead and get started. So right now I'm bringing back all my calls. I don't necessarily want all my calls. I really want this report to focus in on abandoned calls. So for this, I'm going to go ahead and only include not connected calls. That's one way to help determine all those abandoned calls. But even doing this is going to bring me back a lot of transfer legs and things that aren't considered technically abandoned. They're just transfers or forwards, CTI route points, and things like that. So I'm going to filter it down a little bit more. And I want to see not just those calls that are not connected to anything or rerouted or forward. I also want to be able to see those calls that terminated or ended. And that's really what's going to help us determine what an abandoned call is. So for this case, I'm going to add a filter called normal call clearing. All right. What this guy is going to do is it's going to help us filter out all the calls that never connected to anybody, but also cleared normally by somebody disconnecting that phone. Now, you'll notice right here, I don't have match all search criteria selected. In this case, I want to check that. If I don't check that, it's going to bring me a count for every single call in my organization that ended clearly. It's also going to bring me back a count of every call in my organization. I don't want that. That's way too much information. I'm really looking to dig in those abandoned calls and see how long they're actually ringing and how many of those are ringing for those time frames. So I'm going to go ahead and check mark this guy. We're going to view the results. You'll see that that count goes down considerably. So now we have 344 calls. And just for an example, we're going to export this, and I'm going to make sure that we have abandoned call count on. And we're going to save this report also. So for that, I'm just going to go ahead and save, and we'll just call this, we'll call it abandoned ring time. There we go. Abandoned ring time webinar. So now I've got a very general report. I've got some good information in here. Let's go ahead, and I'm not so super concerned with detail. Let's run this guy and take a look at our calls. So now we're seeing our calls. Let me turn on detail on this report here. And I've got a lot of fields in my detail, but that's all right. So now what we have are 344 calls and 344 abandoned calls. Now we've managed to whittle down to just our abandoned calls, but we need to dig into this. I want to see, some of the ring times on these calls are excessive. Why are they ringing so long? I could see 30 seconds, 60-second rings, 68 seconds, and how often is this occurring in my organization? And that's going to be the purpose of this report is we don't want to just see our abandoned calls. We're going to go ahead and isolate and identify the number of these abandoned calls that rang and how long they rang for. So to do that, we're going to go ahead and play with some search sets, and we're going to add more than one search set. We're going to add 3 or 4 different search sets to help break down our individual ring. So for that, I went ahead and I did save this report. So if I go ahead and take a look at my reports, I've got an abandoned ring time report in here, and that's the one we're going to go ahead and play with, this guy right here. So we can take a look. We've got our first one here. This is going to be all abandoned calls, and I could keep the name all abandoned calls. So we'll keep that all abandoned. Now, when I'm building multiple search sets, one rule of thumb that I like to use is when we output those search sets, they're in alphabetical order. So a good little tidbit of information is if you number these, it's actually going to put them in the order that you want to be able to see them. So right now, my first count is going to be all abandoned calls. But I also want to see, out of all of those abandoned calls, how many of them only rang for 5 seconds or less? So we're going to go ahead and create another search set for this guy. Just by clicking on this, now I have a whole nother level of summary that I can add into this report. And we'll call this guy number 2 and calls abandoned within 5-second ring. And 5-second ring is only really about 1 ring. So it's kind of like, did this person really give somebody an opportunity to answer this call? So we're going to add that search criteria. Now, adding our search criteria is pretty much the same. We're really just going to focus in on the same information and kind of repeat that. So I'm going to make sure I'm not including all calls because, again, I only want my not connected calls. All right. I'm going to go ahead and do my original called party number, and I'm going to go ahead and add that same thing. I'm just looking at all my calls, so I'm going to say starts with X. All right. I also want to make sure that I'm only getting those abandoned calls. I'm not getting those transfer legs and things like that. So I'm going to go ahead and also add that originating and terminating cause code the same way we did before. And we'll add normal call clearing in here. All right, so now we also need to be able to focus in on those calls that were less than 5 seconds in ring time. So very easily, we're just going to go ahead and add a filter for ring time also. And let's go ahead and say less than or equal to 5 seconds. But we got to make sure, we definitely have to make sure we check mark this guy, because if we don't, Again, that's bringing back every single call that had less than a 5-second ring time. It's also going to bring me back every call that originated or terminated with the cause code, and it's also going to bring me back every call in my organization. So it's always definitely very important to make sure you check those. Believe me, I've done it plenty of times where I forgot to check mark this box, and now I'm sitting there with a report that's trying to generate for 500,000 calls. But let's take a look at what we've got. So we've got all of our calls. We've got all of our abandoned calls. We have just some general counts in here. We can add some hour or period over period analytics. We're going to turn on our detail so we can see our detail. And let's go ahead and give this guy a save, and we're going to give it a run. And here's our guy. So now we're going to get to see what adding an additional search set does for our report. So I'll run this in HTML, and we're going to do that for the previous week here. All right. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to continue. And the nice thing about that is now we're going to continue to be able to compound onto these searches. So here we have all of our abandoned calls. We can see we have 344 calls. Calls abandoned within a 5-second ring time, 55 of those calls were abandoned within a 5-second ring time. And you'll notice our total counts are still really hyper-focused on that abandoned count ratio. We're not continuing to count the multiple additional searches that we're adding in there, because then you're going to see a lot of duplicate values. So Variphy is smart enough to make the recognition that we don't want those duplicate values. We're really trying to pull out different subsets of information and provide information on that. So with that same thing, let's go ahead and add on to this report. So now we can see all the calls that were abandoned within 5 seconds, but you know what? I want to know how many of those were maybe 6 to 15 seconds. So we can continue to compound onto this guy just by adding additional search sets. And now you'll notice it's number 1. And if you take a look at my report, number 1's up at the top, number 2 is down there. So just a nice little trick to be able to get those search sets in the order that you want to see them is you can go ahead and compound those by just adding an additional number on there. So let's go ahead and add number 3 in here. We'll say calls abandoned within, 15 seconds. Well, you know what? We'll say between. So calls abandoned between 6 and 15 seconds. So now what we're going to do is we're just going to continue to isolate those calls to pull out the metrics we want and produce all that information on a single report. So we're going to, again, rinse and repeat. We're going to go ahead and add that same criteria that we had in our previous search set. We're going to say starts with X. Pretty straightforward. We want to make sure that we are only including our not connected calls. We want to make sure we're matching all the criteria. We're going to get our cause codes in here. All right, we get our normal cause code. Normal cause code, again, normal call clearing means that is the end of the call. That's kind of a standard disconnect, where if you're seeing transfers or forwards, it's not going to have that normal call clearing. It's really just going to have a call split or a call redirect or something like that. So now I've got my original called party number. I've got my originating or terminating cause code. We need to get our ring time in here. All right, let's add that guy. So for the ring time, we want everything either greater than 5 seconds, but we also want everything that is going to be less than or equal to 15 seconds. All right, so by adding that, we're actually doing that in between. So it's not going to repeat the same values that we have here. It's looking at in between. It's greater than 5 seconds, but it's also less than or equal to 15 seconds. All right, so now we've got that. We've got everything checked. Let's give this guy a save, and we'll give it another quick run. And here we are, search time window saves. And there we are. So now what we're seeing are again, we still have all of our abandoned calls. We get to see 55 of those calls were abandoned within 5 seconds, essentially like one ring. That's something that you can look at and be like, okay, these people really didn't give anybody a chance to pick up. But now we're seeing 190 of those calls abandoned between 6 and 15 seconds. All right, so now we can see that, there's some calls in here that had an opportunity to ring, had an opportunity to get picked up, and just did not. So there's a lot of flexibility. We can continue to compound onto this and add all kinds of different metrics. If I want to see all these abandoned calls and I also want to be able to add departments in here, you have the flexibility of doing that by just adding additional search sets. Maybe I want to see how many of these were inbound, how many of these might have been outbound. Again, that's just a matter of adding those search sets. So you can really compound onto a report to get all of the detail that you're looking for. One of the things that we have done, and I'm going to go ahead and bring up a sample of a report that we have that we did. We worked with a customer on, and this was an NECS or an enhanced consultative service. And essentially what we did for this particular customer is they wanted some very specific criteria. They were looking at hunt group information. But what they wanted to see was not just your standard, how many calls came in, how many were abandoned and things like that, but they really, really wanted to dig into that customer's journey. They wanted to know what these customers were going through. So by using the data and using the multiple search sets, we were actually able to build a report that looks like this, where each one of these guys is a different search set pulling back very specific sets of criteria. So one of the things they wanted to see is all the calls that came in that went into their hunt group and got answered without ever hitting their native call queuing. So using a single search set, the first search set we'll call it here, we were able to isolate their hunt group numbers, their devices. Again, we focused in on that normal call clearing because we only wanted those calls that end. We didn't want all those transfer legs in there. We were able to focus in on some of the other codes within the data, like the redirect reasons and the call party pattern, to isolate just the calls that got answered right away off that hunt group. Okay, so it was great to be able to see those calls and how many of those were being answered. But additionally, what we did is okay, it's great. Now we see how many calls are coming in. These guys are getting answered right away. That's what we want. We also want to know how many calls are getting queued. Now, when we talk about the ring time example that I just did, that same concept can go into queue time. So when you're talking about true native call queuing and a call gets queued for a certain amount of time, instead of focusing on ring time, I could build reports around how long are these customers sitting in queue on average? How long are they sitting in queue before they abandon? Just by changing ring time to be able to use queue time and using the native call queuing fields rather than the ring time fields. But here we wanted to see how many calls came in and got queued. We were able to build that out by just focusing on certain values. Now, I could easily run a report on just the hunt group, and it's going to pull me back all of these calls. But what we were looking for here is to try to determine, was there a problem? Did we see a lot of callers coming in and the queues were maxed out? So by being able to focus in on a particular field, we were able to identify just those calls that were maxed out. And it was great, and you could build all of this in a single report, or you could build all of this in multiple reports, but having this whole level of information available at your fingertips on a single report was able to help them understand exactly what their customers were going through when they hit the queue. How many calls were getting answered right away? When were they getting answered? How many times did we max out our queue? Or how many times like this did we have no agents even logged in when we had callers coming in? But by being able to build these all into multiple search sets like we did in this particular report, we were able to provide that customer some very, very detailed information on how their calls and how their customers were being treated, and just really kind of help improve some of their customer service experience. So with that, everybody, hey, I really want to thank everybody for joining us today. I hope we were able to shed a little bit of light on what some of the more mysterious options are, specifically around that match all criteria, but also how to leverage adding additional search sets, because it's a powerful utility to be able to piece of the utility to be able to get a lot of detailed information into a single report, be it just end user information, or be it department and end user information, or even ring time or queue time or anything like that. So I appreciate everybody joining me today. And Dan, we'll pass it back to you, buddy. Do we have any questions today?
Got a few, Victor. Great job as always.
Thank you.
First question that we have is from Frank. He wants to know, is there a way to match up my custom search sets with the Variphy provided call scenario? So I think you kind of hit on this regarding like the abandoned calls option. But, like our call scenario is just very specific logic and definitions to auto-determine the types of calls that are taking place. Basically creating search sets for that. So if you could just speak a couple seconds regarding that, if we
I guess I'm not sure I'm under. Yeah, I guess I'm not sure I'm quite understanding, Dan.
So yeah, if you take like our abandoned call logic from our scenario, right? That's what you built out as a public search set. If you can match any of the other call scenarios, or do we define that like what we define that as? So you can build out these search sets and provide summary at a search set level instead of the call scenario level.
Okay, I got you. Absolutely, yeah, definitely. And that would be very similar to how we would do something like what we've got right here, where I am focusing. And I think, Dan, I'm going in the right direction here, where I'm focusing in on, just abandoned calls. It doesn't have to be abandoned. One of the summary metrics we place is voicemail, but I can actually build a different search set for that call scenario as well. So I can say, calls to voicemail, and build a separate search set around that summary information as well. So I can break down all of those individual call scenarios, be it inbound calls, outbound calls, voicemail calls, how many calls were inbound to voicemail. Each one of those could be an individual search set rather than having to rely on, just a summary statistic somewhere, but also being able to see the detail on that. So Dan, I think I answered that question.
Yeah, you got it.
Okay.
Last question that came in is from Christina. Can I group my data based on the search sets that I configure?
Unfortunately, at this point, we cannot. That is something that we're toying with the idea of, is being able to, build these multiple search sets and then create that secondary grouping that will look at the search set and then give you maybe hourly results on, what hours of the day did people abandon the most within 5 seconds? What hours of the day did somebody abandon most within, a 15 to or a 6 to 15 second range? At the moment, we don't have that. It is something that we are toying with the idea of.
Excellent. Yeah, good question, Christina. Thanks. That's all on the Q&A panel at this point. So if you do have any questions that you're wanting to get answered, please get those submitted as soon as possible. And in the meantime, I am going to announce our weekly winner. Let's see here. All right. So our weekly winner is Lambert Paquette. Sorry if I mispronounced your last name, Lambert. So yeah, thank you for joining us today, Lambert, and everyone else. We'll get that $50 gift card over to you. The AM will be in contact with you here right after our session here. So to wrap up today, just a quick announcement. You can always register for up and coming webinars posted on our website, variphy.com/company/webinars. Just as an announcement, we will be taking a small break for the holidays, and we will reconvene with our weekly Wednesday webinars on January 13th with our session covering what's new in 12.2.3. So some new features that we'll be talking a little bit about in addition to our newly released 12.2.2, which is our current GA release. So that is it for today. Thank you, everyone. Go out, be safe, and happy holidays. Thanks again. We'll talk soon. Bye-bye.
Bye, all.